Welcome everyone to Power Parsha Pearls, and tonight we're going to be taking a look at the Purim story. The Purim story essentially encapsulates what we Jewish people have been enduring over the course of history, and that is classic anti-Semitism. But more than anything, it highlights essentially what is a reality over the course of time, and that is that there are two types of haters, two dimensions to anti-Semitism, if you will. There is the ignorant hater, like the king Achashverosh, and there is the malevolent hater, like Haman. In other words, Achashverosh, he considered the Jews an annoyance, but also recognized their uniqueness, and he flip-flopped over his position on them. Haman, on the other hand, was the first in history who wanted to initiate an absolute final solution, as he actually said to the king at the time, men, women, and children. That's whom he was committed to actually wiping out. Now, in his famous Tamanite letter, as it is called, Maimonides, writing to the Yemenite Jews who were enduring so much persecution, cites the Talmud, which says, why was Mount Sinai so called? And the answer is, as the Talmud concludes, because the word Sinai, or in Hebrew Sinai, is similar to the word sinna, which means hatred. And as Maimonides went on to explain, per the Talmud, at that all-defining moment, when we were declared God's chosen people, we were imbued with a moral ambassadorship. Yes, we are different, and that difference is reflected in the Jewish mind, in the Jewish heart, in the Jewish home, the Jewish family, and the Jewish community. And it oozes a certain kind of spiritual and divine nobility. And often the non-Jew senses it, and sometimes they'll acknowledge it, and sometimes they'll admire it, as was it President John Adams who put it, I will insist the Hebrews have done more to civilize man than any other nation. Many Philo-Semites cherish and celebrate the Jew and his or her Jewishness. So this ignorant hater doesn't necessarily know what Judaism really stands for. For some, it's about, world dominance. After all, they talk about Mashiach, they talk about universal salvation, talk about universal laws. And historically, this was already misinterpreted as looking to make the world ours. For others, Judaism is, if not supremacy, then surely superiority, the chosen people complex. Who do we really think we are? And for others still, the sum total of Judaism is inextricably linked with Israel, which is why whatever happens over there invariably spills over to here as well. And the tragic irony of all this is the fact that in reality, Judaism is but the only one faith that insists that you have purpose as you are. What do we mean when we speak about a chosen nation? It means that our foremost objective is that we've chosen to be responsible to reveal the unity of divinity within a modern day fragmented society. Judaism was formed because we were given the most crucial charge that humanity has ever been given, and that is to represent to civilization the central point of what makes a human being and how indeed we're meant to achieve moral purpose in life. And that's precisely why Judaism is the one faith that doesn't proselytize, that insists that you are as God created you, and you can find true meaning in that very role. Unlike other faiths that insist that the only way to heaven is but through them, Judaism says you hold the ticket to heaven in your hands by virtue of who you are. So the ignorant hater, the likes of the king Achashverosh in the Purim story, finds the Jew an annoyance, a strange phenomenon, something different to him or herself. There's something about the Jew that makes him feel awkward inside. He can't explain it, it just does. And this sort of hater invariably coexists with the Jew and tolerates the Jew, as indeed Achashverosh did. And it's only when opportunity lends itself, when it becomes fashionable to vent the hatred, when it becomes excusable to boycott, as indeed when Haman came and presented his case to Achashverosh, then the same professor who shared your common room, or business colleague who worked with you, or doctor who works alongside you in your hospital, or neighbor who greeted you, will suddenly rear that ugly side. These are people who may be on the one hand looking upon the Jew with admiration and affection, or on the other hand, maybe with hate and repulsion, and usually with a bit of a mixture of the two. But then there is the deeper dimension to anti-Semitism, the Haman dimension. Just to be very clear, Hitler didn't actually hate us because we were different. In his words, we must destroy the tyrannical God of the Jew and his life-denying 10 Commandments. Alas, all too often, there would be many that were inflamed by the uniqueness of the Jew, this ambassadorship, this light onto the nations. When Haman initiated his final solution, he persuades the king with the argument, they're different than us. Their laws are different than ours. He evokes within the king, yes, from the king's perspective, the aforementioned ignorant hatred and agitation. But Haman's own hatred comes from a much deeper place. I mean, think about this. The entire Persian empire bowed down to him. The only one who didn't was Mordechai, the hero of the Purim story. And we are told Haman was filled with rage in his heart against Mordechai. It consumed him totally and utterly. Ask yourself, the world is your oyster. One man doesn't yield, and that becomes your problem. That becomes your total preoccupation. And yet Mordechai's behavior exposes a shallow ditch, if you will, a hollowness in Haman's heart and soul. It exposes the truth that Haman, you are no God. It manifests a feeling of emptiness, which induces a deep-seated hatred. And then Haman has a choice: deal with the effect or eradicate the cause. And so through the course of history, we have been hated on both fronts, whether out of sheer ignorance or from unadulterated malevolence. What is that wonderful story they tell about a traveling salesman who made a deliberate point of going into his local synagogue to pray at whatever town he arrived at? His problem is when he came to Shropshire, no shul, no synagogue for 100 miles. So he did the next best thing. He went into the small town church, took a seat at the back on a Sunday morning, put on his tallis and his tefillin, and he starts to pray away. It's Sunday. People are coming for prayers. After a while, the priest notices that people are shifting a little bit uncomfortably, so he clears his throat and he says, will all those who feel they don't belong please make their way to the exit? This guy is oblivious. He's swaying away. The priest clears his throat. Will all non-Christians please make your way out? Prayers are about to commence. The man pulls his tallit still tighter over his head, and he's really going for it. And the incredulous priest bellows, all Jews leave now. Suddenly the man stops, gets up, folds his tallis, rolls up his tefillin, packs it all into his bag, tucks it under one arm, walks to the front of the church, takes the statue of you-know-who under his other arm and says, come on, Bubala, we're not wanted here. Throughout the course of history, we've been told you're not wanted here. And many scholars or historians try to explain this ongoing obsession with the Jews as not something uniquely connected to Jews or Judaism, but rather as a multitude of isolated events resulting from distinct circumstances. Arabs hate Jews because we were occupiers. Germans hate Jews because they were the scapegoat of a depressed economy. Christians hated Jews because we were supposedly killed their God. Stalin murdered Jews because they were capitalists, while Europeans in the Middle Ages loathed the Jew because of his financial success. The hard fact is that anti-Semitism has existed for too long and in too many disparate cultures to tolerate a claim that in each instance it's because of something else, a distinct factor disconnected from being Jewish. It's not a unitary phenomenon, a coherent belief or ideology. To put it in the words of the book, Why the Jews? Economic depressions do not account for gas chambers. The fact is that Jews have been hated because they were rich and because they were poor, because they were capitalists and because they were communists, because they believed in tradition and because they were rootless cosmopolitans, because they kept to themselves and because they penetrated everywhere. Anti-Semitism is not a belief, but a virus. And as Jonathan Sacks, of blessed memory, famously said, the human body has an immensely sophisticated defense system. And it develops defenses against viruses. It's penetrated, however, because viruses mutate. Anti-Semitism mutates. So now here's the question: what is the legitimate Jewish response? Some argue you're better off keeping a low profile, as has become the acceptable norm, certainly in many parts of Europe, and today, alas, too much in America as well. I don't buy it. I maintain that when we revert to what the author Iswell Zangwill referred to as the ghetto stoop, walking with our heads down, keeping below the radar, you're feeding into the stereotype, you're nurturing the germ, you're scoring an own goal. If the whole point and purpose of anti-Semitism is to reduce the Jew into oblivion, then surely you're accommodating the process when you choose to lie low in the first instance. Kind of reminds me of a rabbi in Manchester who was standing outside his synagogue one morning, his tallis and tefillin in the cold wind, trying to find a 10th man, a Jew, to make up the quorum, the minyan. And one by one, people are walking by, casting a curious glance at him and walking on. One man stops dead in his tracks. What's the matter with you standing outside like that? Aren't you ashamed of yourself? Without missing a beat, the rabbi says, you're just the one I'm looking for. Come inside and be the 10th man. We don't have to be pacifists or even silent observers. We have to confront the world with unwavering commitment in both the spiritual and physical dynamics of our reality. You know, the Talmud famously explains how Haman scored his PR offensive with the king Ahasuerus. He says they're like a mule, which produces no offspring. And he says they won't eat our food, they won't marry our women, they're lazy, they never work. Shabbat, can't work. Passover, can't work. A fly falls into their wine and they'll scoop it out and drink it. You touch it, he says to the king, and they'll throw it out. Later, Esther steps up when she finally brings her counter to the king to plead on behalf of her people. She says to the king, Kinam karnu ani v'ami, because me and my people, ani v'ami, have been sold. In other words, we've been cast asunder. We're going to be destroyed. They're my people. She tugs at his heartstrings. And for good measure, she also throws in the economic argument. You'd make more off us if you sold us rather than destroy us. The question is simply this. What about all those initial complaints that Haman brought? Everything he highlighted about our different laws, our different behavior, our different mindset, it's all true. It's what swayed Ahasuerus to commit himself in the first instance, that ignorant hater, to agree to annihilate us. Esther doesn't seem to address any of that. So what changes the king's mind? And the answer is she does address it. Those two words, ani v'ami, me and my people. These are my people. This is my identity. This is who I am. The king Ahasuerus loved Esther's grace and her nobility. He loved her essence and her soul. She says to the king, you love me. You love my essence. You know what my essence is? I am a Jew. These are my people. Yes, our laws are different. Is that a bad thing? It's what defines me. Yes, we do have days when we don't work. Is that a bad thing? It's what you love about me. And the message is clear. You can get into the nitty-gritty of the debate and explain this law and that law and this passage and whatever else. And that's only going to make a difference, maybe to those who care enough to want to listen. The ultimate retort is ani v'ami. Live by the standards to which you hold yourself, because only when you respect yourself will the rest of the world respect you as well. So with the ever-increasing threat of anti-Semitism rearing its ugly head, and whatever uncertainty the future actually holds. And maybe we might feel intimidated, but we have to always let those powerful words resonate with us. Ani v'ami. Remember that the greatest, most forceful response to whatever threats lurk out there is to stand tall and proud in your identity, because it's only, again, when you hold your head high and you respect yourself and you believe in who you are and what you represent, that the world takes notice. And herein lies the paradox. If we choose to conceal our own identity, if we bend over backwards and choose to just be afraid and be like one of them, try to blend in, that not only will that not solve the problem, it'll only compound the problem. That's the story of the Jewish people from time immemorial. We face our problems and we respond to them positively. We refuse to give in to panic, to bitterness, to self-pity. For 2,000 years, we've been enduring all kinds of pain and suffering and trial and tribulation and persecution and anti-Semitism, but the reality is we're still here to tell the tale. We, the Jewish people, are a collective affirmation of life, and our existence and our achievements are a living testimony to one of Judaism's greatest messages to humankind, and that is the principle to defeat of tragedy by the power of hope.